This meeting is being recorded.
All right. Good evening, everyone. I've probably said it a bunch of times, but thank you again for joining us in our virtual Cemetery Stewardship Preservation Series. This is our second installment. So newcomers, welcome. Those who have taken the first one, thank you for coming back and joining us. So I'm happy to kind of turn this over to Jason because he has a lot to share with you this evening. At the end of the program, we'll have a Q&A and discussion, and I can give further P&J announcements and program announcements. So I'm going to turn it over to our guest speaker, Jason Harp, who's the Director of Cemetery Conservation at Richard Grubb & Associates, and he has way over 20 years of experience in this field, and specifically historic preservation of cemeteries. He leads workshops and all different, like tonight, both in person in the field and virtually. And I'm assuming at conferences and traveling all across the United States, helping communities such as yourself with their cemetery preservation needs. So, Jason, I'm going to turn it over to you. And thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Great, Kelly. It's an honor and a pleasure to be back with you after the first workshop virtual. The first workshop was in the dark, and now we've got some light, so that's a beautiful thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my camera off to save a little bandwidth. Plus, I don't know that you all need to see me during the time that I'm doing the presentation, so I'm going to turn this off and get started. So again, it's an honor and a pleasure to be with you all tonight. I hope that if there are folks who are on tonight that attended the first workshop, I've tried to tailor this workshop or this presentation to include not duplicate what I used in the first workshop, because the first workshop was sort of an overall cemetery preservation workshop that included research and recordation. So I've dug deep and tried to pull more examples from my projects over the years, and so I'm hoping that will be the case, that there will not be too much duplication. As Kelly mentioned, I am the Director of Cemetery Conservation for Richard Grubb & Associates, a cultural resource management firm that's headquartered in Cranberry, New Jersey. We have additional offices in Philly and Wake Forest, North Carolina, and in Nashville, Tennessee. While I say I work out of the North Carolina office, basically my office is on the road. I travel all along the East Coast, working as far up as Maine and as far down south as Mississippi and Louisiana. So I like to state this from the beginning, because I feel like a lot of folks don't do that in their presentations, even though you've seen in the material that Kelly provided what the purpose of tonight's presentation and the goals are. My mission tonight is to provide you with resources to start and or continue your research on your cemetery and the grave markers in your cemetery and the stories on the decedents who are buried in your cemetery, and equip you with some tools to start or continue your documentation process. I use start and continue because I feel like we are never finished. There is always more research to do, always more documentation to do. So I don't feel like we cross the finish line, because there's just so much more unbelievable material, research, and stories that we have to tell of our cemeteries and the people buried in our cemeteries. And another thing folks who know me do that I always start out with disclaimers. Some of you have seen this before in my presentations. I will not be able to cover everything. At some point, maybe there will be an opportunity for me to publish something that covers much more than I'm able to deliver in my virtual presentations or in-person presentations. So I'll do everything I can to cover as much material as possible and address either tonight or in email correspondence we have with specific questions that you might have. And I always throw this in here, the usage of grave marker as one word or two words. I just always do this to let you know I know how to spell. But in the South, a lot of times we use grave marker as one word instead of two. And the publications photographs in my presentation, I use them only to illustrate my points, and I try to give credit wherever I can on with these photographs and these images of publications. If your question was not answered tonight, please email me. After my first presentation, I received numerous emails. We've been able to connect people with other individuals who can help them with legal matters with their cemeteries, or try to give them further advice on what they're dealing with their cemeteries. So please reach out to me after the presentation, and or reach out to Kelly with your questions. Also, share with me information on your cemeteries, photographs of your projects. They go a long way in helping me educate others when we do cemetery preservation plans or presentations. And I really enjoy seeing what everyone's doing. City Council and County Commission or council minutes are great resources for municipal cemeteries. And I won't be showing those examples tonight. I try to stay away from any kind of potentially sensitive matters, but I will say that those are unbelievable resources that I do not include in my presentation, but that you should consider consulting. And many times, or most times, those are related to municipal cemeteries. Photogrammetry, another fantastic technological tool for you to document grave markers in your cemetery. I don't have enough time tonight to address that. Maybe that's something we can look at in the future, is another presentation just looking at technology. Oral history is another fantastic resource to document the history of your cemetery, but won't be able to do that tonight. I will say up front, I am a firm believer during living in a digital age in hard copies of files. If you are a cemetery steward who has amassed this voluminous resource, or this voluminous collection of hard copies and files that you're not able to house, I suggest that you talk to someone at a local, regional, or statewide archive that can help you with those resources. I do believe strongly in digital files, but I'm just kind of old school, and I feel like we do need to keep and retain digital copies. So research, research, research. I do this all the time. I have so many friends who research their cemeteries, whether their ancestors are buried there or if it's just an amazing cemetery they want to research. So I'm going to go over tonight a number of resources that I have used over the years, and I'm sure that there will be more that I did not touch on tonight. And again, I want you to reach out to me if you have examples of resources that you have used to help with your documentation, your research and documentation in your cemeteries. A lot of these resources that I mentioned too vary from state to state. We always recommend that folks check with their state historic preservation office or their Office of State Archaeology to see if there are state cemetery survey forms, and if they have them as hard copies or if they digitized them. And if they haven't digitized them, is there an opportunity for you in your request to have the state level organization digitize them for you? What's interesting for some states is that some cemeteries have been recorded as part of a countywide architectural survey and may have been assigned a specific number, but have also been surveyed as part of, say, a cemetery form through the Office of State Archaeology and have a separate cemetery survey form. So we suggest that you check both resources. So, the next two bullet points are your State Historic Preservation Office and your Office of State Archaeology. Another great resource is environmental reports that are part of a regulatory process that in many cases result in a historic structure survey report. And those could be Department of Transportation projects. They could be, any number of projects that involve federal funding that trigger something that's called a Section 106 review. WPA cemetery surveys, really invaluable surveys that typically date from 1935 to 1942. And what those can do is they can help you determine what was in your cemetery during that time period compared to what's there now. So you may have a grave marker that's missing currently but was documented as part of the WPA survey between 1935 and 1942. Other great resources that a lot of folks know about is newspapers. That if you have an account with newspapers.com, Ancestry, or Family Search, you can access obituaries, death certificates, and a number of other resources. I'm going to go over these. I'm going to have these as part of my presentation tonight. Topographical maps and Sanborn maps. If you don't know what Sanborn maps are, those are fire insurance maps that are invaluable resources and are, in many cases, available online. And then there are maps that are in public and private repositories that are not available online, or they could potentially be available online, but a lot of times they're in these repositories, and these repositories have documented them, but they haven't made them available online. So it's important, for you to reach out to your local historical society, and if you have a local history collection at your library. Funeral home records, I'm not providing any of those tonight. Some of those can be very sensitive. I suggest that you reach out to your local funeral home. As the city that I live in, we have a funeral home that's been around for many years, and I've learned recently they have death records that date back to the 1940s. So that's another great resource. Deeds and other city and county records. I'm going to show some slides of some of those tonight. Postcards. I was communicating with one of my colleagues earlier this week about some projects that we worked on, and I had forgotten about postcards. These are other great resources that I'm going to mention tonight as well. Primary resources such as letters, and journals. Again, I'm going to show examples of those tonight. Local government records, as I mentioned, and also excuse my typo, but records of your local monument company. I have not checked with some of our monument companies because a lot of them are newer companies, but that's also a great resource if you're trying to document any potential grave markers that could be significant because of funerary art or because of who was involved with putting those together. So these are some examples from North Carolina. Throughout tonight's presentation, I've tried to include as much from the Mid-Atlantic as possible, but the area where I spend most of my time researching is in North Carolina. Even though these are North Carolina, I do believe that within other states in the Mid-Atlantic and New England, there are equivalent forms that are provided or available through your State Historic Preservation Office or your Office of State Archaeology. So the form on the left, in North Carolina, we actually have a person whose title is a cemetery specialist. She is an archaeologist, and one of her one of the things that she does is documenting cemeteries, and she's prepared three different types of forms to document cemeteries. One is for the general public, and one is for consultants to complete, whether you're doing a survey that's part of a regulatory project, or if you're a citizen of your county that's interested in documenting your cemeteries. And it's a great resource to provide, to fill out and provide and keep documentation on. The second form I'm showing is part of is one that's part of an architectural survey. As I mentioned earlier, sometimes you have both say a historic structures data sheet that was provided that's part of an architectural survey, and then another form that's part of a documentation through Office of State Archaeology. And then the WPA surveys. This is an example from a cemetery in Shelby, North Carolina, which is close to where I live, that provides really invaluable resources from the time period that I mentioned, from the 30s to the 40s. So I'm going to give you some examples of what you could potentially find in these survey files, because a lot of times I think folks don't think there could be that much in those survey files. This is a fantastic unadorned Greek Revival style church built in the 1840s in the county that I live in, that we have just finished a National Register nomination on. It is for a church and a cemetery. And I'd actually forgotten, when the architectural historian with our company who was writing the nomination requested the survey files. Actually, there was stuff that I'd worked on in the survey files. So the two photographs on the left show this great building before it was painted. We still don't know exactly when it was painted. And the photograph on the right shows an image of some grave markers in the cemetery that are part of the permanent collection of the County Historical Association here in the county that I live in. Additionally, there are documents that are both primary resources and secondary resources that you could potentially find in those survey files. And a lot of the files that are in that individual files that are in that survey file are from the individual who conducted that survey. And this photograph on the right that shows a newspaper article that says Mike Pilo wins its fight for life. This was important because we didn't know that at one point the Methodist Conference was considering selling the property. And eventually there was an organization that stepped forward and who now actually owns the property and who is preserving it. Geological surveys, for those of you who saw my first workshop, I did use these images, but this is a fantastic geological survey that Kelly actually provided us. And it shows a graveyard on the Ringwood Iron Mines property. Sometimes you don't find these, and other times you're very fortunate that you do actually find these denoted on maps. This is an interesting map. One of my colleagues reminded me of today that she actually found on Etsy. I was not aware that these types of things were available on Etsy. So Grove Hill Cemetery in Oil City, Pennsylvania, that colleague specifically wrote a preservation plan for the cemetery, for Grove Hill Cemetery, and I thought I would show you how important if you can find these maps. And again, I had no idea they were available on Etsy. I don't know how many are, but this one in particular was on the map, although blurry, does show you the areas where the cemetery is located within the city. This is a local example that I love to show people. This is a historic map that was drawn in the city that I live in that shows within our downtown, the blocks within the downtown. It shows the railroad, it shows quarries, it shows a number of things. I actually had one of our GIS specialists overlay this onto a modern map, and you can see in the photograph on the right, the block that is pointed out shows a potter's field. And it wasn't until he overlaid this on a modern map that I realized that that area is now where Family Dollar is. And for many years, the pavement, the asphalt in the parking lot of this Family Dollar, there were many problems with the pavement falling in. And so I've not communicated this with our city, but this is another interesting thing you can find out, you can learn, and can help you on your journey. Again, you may not have been focused on a potter's field, but within the city that you live in, you may be interested in learning as much as you can about the cemeteries or burial grounds within your cemetery, and you can find them through some of these primary sources. The Sanborn maps, Grove Hill Cemetery that I mentioned a few slides back, you can use Sanborn maps. Many times there are cemeteries that are not located as part of the Sanborn Company's coverage that lie outside the skirts of town, but these cemeteries can be illustrated on the cover pages of these Sanborn books or Sanborn maps. The photograph on the left shows Grove Hill Cemetery and the Catholic Cemetery in 1901. The reason I highlight these dates is because you can see the expansion of Grove Hill Cemetery between 1901 and 1913, which again is part of your quest as someone who's researching to try to determine everything you can about your cemetery. Another great resource could be land plats as part of your city or county records. This is the Henderson Family Cemetery in Durham, North Carolina, was a family cemetery that eventually became part of what we called, as part of a National Register nomination, the West Durham Historic Cemeteries, that included both a city cemetery and two African American cemeteries. And just a little bit of mapping, um, through a little bit of mapping, you can determine how these plots kind of fit in and where they were originally and how they fit in now to the overall topography of the landscape. Masonic lodges. I'm a member of Lincoln Lodge number 137 in Lincolnton. And as part of my research and thinking and processing, I decided to reach out to members of our lodge to see what was in our minutes that could help folks on their journey. Because I knew at one point when individuals in the lodge passed away, they typically provide in the minutes a full page that biographical information. And for this one, I picked this one in particular because it's for Martin L. Pfeiffer, who's actually who his grave marker is at a historic site where he is not interred. The individuals who are responsible for maintaining this historic site saved these grave markers after the cemetery was defaced many years ago for an apartment complex. So this is just another potential avenue for you to pursue if you're doing research on individuals buried in your cemetery. This is a very interesting. I was so excited many years ago to learn about this. St. Luke's Episcopal Church and Cemetery in Lincolnton, site listed in the National Register of Historic Places, includes the church, the cemetery, the parish house, and another building. And many years ago, someone reached out to me from another state and said that they have an ancestor who they think is buried at the cemetery. And the photograph on the right is of the individual who was killed in our city. I think it was in 1865. And I show this because they did not provide this photograph, but we found this photograph through Find a Grave. So Find a Grave can be a very valuable, and a lot of you may already know this, a valuable resource as you continue through your journey. So we learned about Daniel Young's being buried in the cemetery through a descendant, but was only through Find a Grave that we were able to find this. And I'm saying it's a daguerreotype. I'm pretty sure it's a daguerreotype. So just very briefly, I found this on the Find a Grave page for St. Luke's and Daniel Young's. It provides information about his life, how he ended up in Lincolnton, and also provided some details on a specific primary resource that documented his death. This is a war record related to Daniel Young's death that says he did die in a hospital at Lincoln, North Carolina. And this is from the journal of someone who worked as a doctor at this hospital that shows Daniel Young dying in Lincoln, North Carolina. Sadly, there is no grave marker for Daniel Young's at St. Luke's Episcopal Church, but there has been discussion about putting a commemorative marker for him there. And without doing the research, folks wouldn't know this. So that's why, again, I can't say enough how important all the research is. Going back as a potential resource on Find a Grave, one of the things that I've done over the years is as I've done conservation work in cemeteries, I have added those photographs to Find a Grave as part of that individual grave marker's story. So the photograph you see on the left for Joshua Dillingham, the photographs in the lower left show the grave marker before any work was done to it. The multi-component grave marker was displaced, and after I did the conservation work, I added post-conservation photographs, and the same thing for the photograph on the right. And while you and your efforts may not be doing conservation, I strongly encourage folks as part of the story for individual grave markers in your cemetery to go in and add updated photographs. There may be photographs already populating your cemetery's Find a Grave site, but those photographs could be from 25 years ago. Well, maybe not 25, maybe 15 years ago. So I encourage you as part of your effort to add photographs or update the photographs for individuals who are buried in your cemetery. This is another one from St. Luke's Episcopal Church, and it ties into what I was saying about checking in and staying tied in with local historical societies. This is another Union soldier who is buried at St. Luke's Episcopal Church in the town that I live in. We've known that for many years. Everybody has known or spoken of him as Captain George French. And through the newsletter of the organization that I used to direct, someone reached out to the organization to provide additional information about Mr. French that I think will be very important for future generations. Other potential resources, I won't spend a ton of time on these because I feel like a lot of folks know now about newspapers, newspapers.com. This specific example is for an African American cemetery in Durham, North Carolina, where we have done a lot of work over the years. And the reason why this newspaper article is important, we've done geophysics at the cemetery, specifically LIDAR, a LIDAR survey. And the friends of this cemetery have done a ton of research. They've documented over 1,800 burials, and there are less than 300 grave markers. And one of the things that this newspaper article points out from someone who visited the cemetery is that a lot of the grave markers they saw when they visited were wooden head and footboards that likely deteriorated over time, and that's why a lot of those markers are now missing. Historic photographs, I've shown this before. These are very important for helping with an understanding of the landscape. This photograph is from Mount Olive Cemetery in Jackson, Mississippi. The photograph on the right is of James Hill's monument that really does not have much hardscape or very many hardscape features left from what we found in the original photograph on the left. Same thing for Ida Revels Redmond. These photographs can go a long way with helping you understand the landscape around the cemetery, as you see in the photograph on the left. There are small, front gabled houses that at one point lined the street behind the cemetery that is now part of the university's campus. This is one of my favorites, and how could it not be one of your favorites? As I mentioned, the Historical Association in the town that I live in was very fortunate many years ago to receive this historic photograph, and I have not seen a lot of these. I'm sure they're out there, of John Thomas McLean, his monument company in Lincolnton, North Carolina. And as soon as we received this photograph, I had to go out and find where that grave marker was. And so eventually I did in a small church cemetery. And it's just, I feel like a lot of this is kind of show and tell, and I don't mean it to be. But yeah, it is, and it's exciting, and I feel like you can gain excitement once you find these types of resources. This is just a great stereoscope of Woodlawn Cemetery in Titusville, Pennsylvania, cemetery for which we wrote a preservation plan. I just had to show it. So Annie McDonald, who is on our staff, she wrote the preservation plan for the cemetery with my assistance. And so, again, it's another example of great historic photographs. And the reason I showed this one, this shows a brook at Woodlawn Cemetery. And she explained to me while she was out there, she tried to take a photograph from the same perspective. And the reason it's different, the view is different, or what you see is different, is because of they had some issues over the years with erosion and a number of other things that sort of changed that landscape. Postcards, I don't think a lot of folks think about postcards, and maybe they do, but it's not something that I have thought about over the years. This is Maplewood Cemetery. I showed you some photographs earlier. The photograph on the left is from 1909, and you can see in the photograph what I've circled is the Duke family mansion. The Duke family, that Duke University was named after, they have a large mausoleum in this cemetery. And we had been out to the site and photographed, and then we photographed a lot of things. And then as we started doing research, we found this postcard, and you can really see how the landscape has changed over time from 1909, and this street view here is from 2022. And we feel like that landscape has changed because of widening the road, putting in the sidewalk. So again, postcards are another great resource for you not to exclude from your research. Again, this is Woodlawn Cemetery in Titusville. The postcard on the left, while it seems like may seem inconsequential, it's just, again, it's part of your overall story. The photograph on the postcard on the left shows this wood fencing that runs along this
You can do
one
insurance.
elevation
No problem.
that's, again, no longer there. And Annie took this photograph in 2023 with the Drake Monument in the distance. You can see the Drake Monument here in the postcard. But again, it's just, again, part of your story. We encourage folks to not only think about their cemetery and individual grave markers, but also the landscape as well and how it's changed over time. Estate files. Luckily in North Carolina, I'm not sure about every state, but one of the resources that we have available through Family Search is estate files. This is a grave marker that I photographed a number of years ago. And luckily, a local genealogist had a conversation with her, and she was telling me that she had pulled Jacob Baker's estate file. He died in 1842. And she said, I'm going to send you some information that'll make you really happy. There is a receipt in his estate file from 1843 that is signed by the stonecutter, and the receipt was for setting the grave marker. It also included the cost for the coffin. But then there's an estate file that's nearly less than a year later for someone being paid for mending the headstone. Now, this might seem like it's like nerding out, but again, this really tells a story of these cast iron strap hinges that are part of this grave marker story. We completed the conservation of some box tombs at a family cemetery, and we were very happy about finding in this a number of estate files as part of this family that there were receipts for paying a company that we eventually learned was out of Charleston, South Carolina, for these what they called in the documents marble tombs. But in addition to those, there was also a receipt for paying local folks to make a stone wall around this small family cemetery. And the organization who now owns this cemetery is planning to put a stone wall back around the cemetery. Church records, if you're fortunate, you have church records. A lot of churches don't, or they're part of, if you're a Methodist church, part of the conference, the Lutheran church, part of the session. We worked on a project and again, another cemetery where I live, where we found burial records that did outline the burial locations of a lot of their congregants, some of them in the cemetery and some of them in other cemeteries. So these are other valuable resources to consult. Journals and diaries. A lot of times these journals have not been digitized or transcribed. In other cases, they have been. And within those transcribed records, you can find some pretty valuable stuff. This one in particular, a judge from Lincolnton, his journal has been transcribed, and this was the only reference we have ever been able to find to what he calls a vault, or what we call a tomb in a cemetery in our downtown area. And this is actually the tomb that he was referring to. This is a published journal from a woman who was part of a prominent family in Charlotte, North Carolina I think mainly the 1830s. And I pulled this out as a friend pointed out to me. This is not about a specific cemetery or a person, but it relates to the burial of an African-American woman. And within her journal, she points out a number of things that a lot of folks may have missed over the years regarding how she was buried, when she was buried, at what time she was buried, and members of the enslaved who were on this plantation, what was happening as part of that burial. So again, another really invaluable resource. I put this one in here because we can't find it. So this is the journal of an individual who was a public historian, who was a chronicler, He wrote incessantly about what he did daily. Some of the entries could be teaching school, as you can see in the first image, teaching school, teaching school. He had his own school, but he also noted in this entry from, I think it's August 10th, 1881, that in addition to teaching school and intermission for dinner, and he also, as part of that, was cutting an inscription on a stone for Lizzie Hager, who died yesterday. And on the stone, he carved ELH died August 9, 1881. We have, I include this because this is a great resource, but we've yet to find that grave marker. So again, tells another little bit of the story for these folks. Catalogs, Montgomery Ward, Sears and Roebuck. There's a really great resource online called Stone Quarries and Beyond. I did not provide a link for it, but that's something I can provide later. On this website, there are just unbelievable digitized resources, specifically Sears and Roebuck's catalogs, Montgomery Ward catalogs, and I mean, I can't even begin to tell you how much material there is on there. But again, it's Stone Quarries and Beyond. It's a resource that a mentor of mine told me about years ago, and it's just again an invaluable resource. And if anybody involved or as part of the presentation needs a link, I'll be glad to provide that to you. That's where I pulled this one entry from the Sears and Roebuck catalog. The grave marker on the left is from Fort Nelson National Cemetery in Nicholasville, Kentucky. And we were able to find a nearly identical on the Sears and Roebuck catalog for this grave marker. Other things, again, kind of getting in the weeds, kind of nerding out, is fencing. There are resources that can help you determine ages of fencing, based on the type, based on the material. This is a project I worked on in Jackson, Mississippi, where they were able to match some of the fencing or the replacement or refabricated fencing to some of the original. So now I'm going to switch to recordation, which is another very important part of the process. You can do a ton of research, but how are you documenting what it is that you're doing? So one of the things we strongly encourage people to do is, as I said in the beginning, I know we need to document things digitally, but I also feel like we need to do things hard copy as well. So I often tell people in our preservation plans who have a tendency to get bogged down in how much work there is to do, so they can't get through the forest, in essence, to the weeds. So I always tell people, do something, but have a plan as well. So the photograph on the left is from Green Lawn Cemetery in Aston, PA, and we wrote a preservation plan for their stewards. And I was really interested to see when I was there that they have taken sort of the rudimentary steps to just take small stakes, and where they did not before have sections and rows, they created them. So they just took small stakes, created their sections, created their rows, they laminated them, and they put them on the stakes. So to me, that is, a group of folks saying, we're going to do something, and this is how we're going to do it, and we're not going to sit back and wait and talk about it forever. We're going to do something. And then the photograph on the right is sort of a more advanced step. The photograph is of my boss actually recording GPS coordinates for damaged grave markers for a conditions assessment and recordation process that we did in Nantucket. I can't ever say enough about Gear Cemetery in Durham, North Carolina. It's a project that's very near and dear to my heart. Their Friends organization has done an amazing amount of research over the years, and I include this slide because as we think about ways to document cemeteries, whether it's a database, whether you hire a company to create a really advanced system through their website, what the Friends of Gear have done over the years is they've just created spreadsheets. And this spreadsheet they share with me as part of one of our projects is on African-American men who are Freemasons who are buried in the cemetery. And to me, it's just some basic data that's linked to some Google forms that they've created over the years. And again, I just always encourage people not to get so overwhelmed that you don't start. Organize, start, create a path, and do something. If you're at a point where you are, as part of your planning process, I always encourage folks to, if you have any kind of cemetery that has trees, it's important that you do some kind of survey and assessment that helps you understand what trees need to be trimmed, what trees need to possibly be taken out, because a project can be stymied and excitement can be quelled by trees in your cemetery falling and destroying the grave markers that are there. Recognizing what's in your cemetery. If you don't know what original plantings, what is in there, not just the grave markers, but what's there. So many times I see efforts at cemeteries where well-intentioned, they go in and immediately start cutting down trees, cutting down underbrush when there could be something on the landscape that's original that does not need to be removed. So I think it's important that we understand, again, the landscape and what's there and what does it mean. I pointed this out before. A lot of folks miss this when they're looking at grave markers. They see the sort of pronounced engravings or inscriptions on the grave markers and the pronounced iconographic images like the death heads, but they don't pay attention to what the full grave marker and understand what other inscriptions are on the grave marker, like marks of the stonecutter or graveyard, not graveyard, but the marble yard or whatever kind of yard that these things were made at. There are also, many things there that you have to observe. A more advanced method is using database forms. One of the ones that we use is FileMaker Pro. The good thing about database forms where there's access or FileMaker Pro is once you record the information, you can always go back and add additional information. You can create specific fields that are particular to your cemetery. Mapping is another thing that we do on a regular basis. We do have equipment to get very precise GPS coordinates, but if you don't, there are other ways to do it too that at least get you in the area of where these. This image shows specific locations of individual grave markers. If you're part of an effort to document whether it's abandoned or sort of forgotten cemeteries in your county or city, just getting something close, some GPS coordinates close can be really helpful. I always show this slide. This is a cemetery in the eastern part of North Carolina. The minister who was at this church was also a botanist. So I show this to encourage folks who may attend a church and have a cemetery that has a really interesting landscape, but you don't know about it and you don't understand it. Dr. Cheshire, as a botanist, documented it. He spent a lot of time bringing in plants and trees from other states and other countries to adorn this landscape, and it's a pretty amazing sight. Another thing that comes to me on a regular basis is what you end up doing if you've got a grave marker that has been damaged many times over the years, has been inappropriately repaired. What do you do with it? This is an example on the local level of a grave marker for which the family had a photograph that showed, I think it was from the 1930s, of what this grave marker looked like. As you can see, probably 25% of this grave marker was missing. So they got to the point where they said, we want to keep the original, but it's not helping anyone because it's so damaged and been repaired so many times. So the family arrived at a place where they said, we're gonna put a replacement here. So what they decided to do was to do just that. And I'm showing this as part of the documentation process, instead of just putting up this grave marker and, if folks come to the site, they may not know that this is not the original. the family decided to work with the monument company to put their name and the date on the back side of the grave marker. Photography, I always have a tendency to dwell on this, but I'm just gonna kind of give you the crib notes version of this. I'm a stickler for photographs, and I think it's a disservice if you go out, if you're someone who cares about your cemetery, to not spend the time to learn how to take photographs. We live in a different time. We're not taking photographs with film now, and you have the ability and the capacity with your phone, even though I prefer that folks use SLR, DSLR cameras to take photographs, and good quality photographs, because they're going to help future researchers and documentarians, whether you put them on Find a Grave or you have a blog or a vlog or on social media. And again, I'm just going to kind of breeze through these. Some of you folks may not have a tripod or a reflector, but there are ways that I'm willing to share with you kind of before and after photographs that can help you take better photographs. So I'm going to show you some examples. So I'm going to show you photographs of that folks have shared with us. Some of them are photographs where they needed conservation work, and some were just to show us. And these are some don'ts, and I'm showing you these just to help you kind of illustrate why maybe some of them are obvious why they don't really help us. So this photograph, we don't really have any idea what's going on other than the photograph is lying on its back on the grass. With this one, we can tell it's been damaged and looks like previously repaired, but we don't know a lot other than that. The photograph on the right was on Find a Grave, and we understand why they included this in the cemetery's entry, because we feel like they were adding it for genealogical purposes. But again, they didn't provide any photographs other than this. Same thing on the photograph on the left. There just wasn't a lot there for us to determine what was going on. I'm going to show you some do's. Now, I took these photographs. I'm not saying I'm the best photographer. I'm just giving some examples. You can see in the photographs, I situated myself to get a really good straight on view. I was fortunate when I took these photographs, the sun was hitting these stones in the right way. And I'm going to show you some photographs that if the sun is not hitting the face of the stone, ways that you can work around that and get really good photographs. So these are the photograph on the right was taken by Sarah Bryan with the North Carolina Folklife Institute. And these are posted on Facebook as part of some of her efforts with folk grave markers. The sun is not hitting the face of the stone. She is using a reflector to reflect the sun on the face of the stone to get a really good photograph and capture this kind of icon, kind of a folk vernacular flower that's on the face of the stone. Another thing that could be part of your documentation process, a lot of cemeteries or cemetery stewards may not be at the point where they may not have the funds to do this, but there are partnerships that you could explore if you've got a local university that has an anthropology program that does have ground penetrating radar that you could use as part of your effort. I'm just showing you these because these are really good examples of what you can capture as part of geophysical surveys. And when I say geophysical, that can be ground penetrating radar, which is sort of a buzzword now, but there are other surveys like LiDAR surveys, magnetometry, photogrammetry as well. Again, that I mentioned I'm not going to get into for the sake of time, but the photograph on the left shows a geophysical, this is ground penetrating radar survey that we did at the cemeteries that I mentioned throughout the presentation at Gear Cemetery. And then the photograph on the right is important. It's a LiDAR survey that we chose to go with because the cemetery has so many deep depressions. We felt like we could capture the truth, like the breadth of what was happening in this cemetery. And as you can see in this image, which is fantastic, how many depressions there are, deep depressions in the cemetery that we probably would not have gotten if we did not use this technology. This is a recent geophysical survey that we did as part of a documentation process at Mount Olive Cemetery at Jackson State University in Jackson, Mississippi. We were able to use both ground penetrating radar and LiDAR for this survey. And as our contact on this project has documented around 1,400 burials in the cemetery, and so we were able through this technology to get pretty close to what she found in her research through both the LiDAR and the ground penetrating radar. Another type of documentation that can be a little expensive, and you see it quite often at larger cemeteries, is there are companies that there are a number of companies that can help you at your cemetery by taking the original documents that you have on hand, scanning those documents, creating this unbelievable website that helps you with, if you're an active cemetery, can help you determine, what burial spots are available throughout the cemetery. There's like veterans projects that you can pursue, and I use the Oakwood Cemetery in particular because I know that they have used a company to help them through this process. And I encourage you to look up Oakwood Cemetery in Raleigh, North Carolina, and you can see how dynamic this website is. And I always end with this: at the end of the day, do no harm and have fun at whatever you do at your cemeteries. And here's my contact information.
All right. Thank you, Jason, very much for this wonderful presentation. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to our guest. If anyone wants to unmute yourself to ask your questions, or you can use your chat feature, and I'd be happy to relay your questions. So the first one, just because it's in the chat, is by Eric. He asked, what kinds of plants used in historic cemeteries have significant meanings?
Say one more time. I'm sorry, Kelly.
Sorry, it's probably speaking too fast. What kinds of plants used in historic cemeteries have significant meanings?
Well, I always hate to reply with this example or with this statement. It depends. So in African American cemeteries, many times we see yucca plants. We have been involved with projects in African American cemeteries where they at some point sadly have become like a dumping ground because they've been neglected. So as part of the cemetery stewards cleanup effort, we've had to involve the Office of State Archaeology to ensure that so the difference between grave goods and what is contemporary trash. So it varies. I mean, our involvement with, I don't think I showed a slide of this. In Greenwood Cemetery in Jackson, Mississippi, their cemetery association has a pretty active effort at recognizing, acknowledging wildflowers that are there. They're also working in the cradle graves that are there, planting period appropriate flowers. But as part of that process, sort of excavating within the cradle grave, they have found bulbs. So, and it helps because in their cemetery association, they have a number of master gardeners. So they have taken those bulbs home, planted them, and found that they're period plants that are there. And one of the reasons this comes in is important is depending on who your maintenance crew is, and by the maintenance crew, sorry, so if the maintenance crew, who it is, if it's a church, if it's a municipality, they may have no understanding of what's there, other than the fact that they have to go in and they have to mow and they have to weed eat. So one of the things that we encourage that they do, that Greenwood is doing, is they're trying to take specific areas that they've identified where there are wildflowers or plants that are growing there that are sort of heritage plants, and keeping the maintenance crews away from those areas so they don't either destroy them through mowing or weed eating. So again, I think that's part of the research process is you know, what time period is your cemetery from? Was it part of the rural cemetery movement? It's that's why I said it's a never-ending process. It's just figuring out what's there currently. And Greenwood's very fortunate. They have a well-known horticulturalist whose his name is Felder Rushing, and Felder's helped them understand what's there, and as part of the research and documentation process.
Thank you, Jason. We have a few more in the chat. So I'll
Sure.
a few more, and then, of course, anyone if they want to unmute themselves. So Alessandra asks, please, can you elaborate what are LiDAR depressions?
So in African American, so specifically Gear Cemetery that for which I showed a photograph. When we so the Friends of Gear Cemetery have it's a very active group who over the years, and what's really great, and I did not in my first presentation I use them as a case study. And the reason I use them as a case study is because a lot of folks think that the first step in their preservation process is to go in and clean the grave markers. Gear Cemetery, they have not really even touched a grave marker yet. After I think we first started talking with them in 2019. So they have done research. And then of course we did what was called an archaeological survey. It was documenting what's there. But what the Friends of Gear does is they've done a good job of when I say cleaning up, anytime there are down limbs, down trees, and Gear Cemetery is fortunate because it's in Durham where Duke University is. So they've been able to make connections. And I can't stress enough, if you are in an area where there is a university with who could potentially have a program that could help you, whether it's forestry. So I promise I'm going to get to the LiDAR. I promise. I'm getting there. But Gear, when they had problems with trees, they were able to use the forestry department at Duke University to to address those kind of things. So at Gear, when we were considering what geophysical technique to use, if we were going to use LiDAR, anytime if you Googled it or if you know what LiDAR is, when our specialists are running the unit does not need to come, it needs to stay in contact with the soil or the ground. And so all of these really deep depressions, the unit was not going to stay in contact with them. So what we decided to do, we proposed as part of the project was to do the LiDAR survey. So it's basically, using a drone to go up, shoot above the cemetery and shoot down onto the cemetery. So it's basically above ground and it's picking up all of those, not only the depressions, but you can set it so that it picks up within a specific area or specific size or from the ground. And I'm willing, whoever asks the question, I'm willing to, I can email you that photograph or that graphic image as well, because when we had the conference call with all the stewards and the project sponsors, there was a point at which everybody was silent, and we said, "Are you all there?" And they said, "Yeah, we're here. We're speechless because it really was mind blowing what we were able to find just through that survey."
Hi, Jason. My name is Victoria. I'm a drone pilot as well, Part 107 as
Oh,
well
okay.
as an archaeologist. My question too is, how high did you fly with a LiDAR payload, and what did you find the best altitude setting?
That is a good question that I can't answer you right now because
Okay.
I was part of the project, but I did not do the geophysics. But if feel free to email me, then I can get you to our staff who did that project. I was part of the archaeological survey that involved me doing more of the documentation of the grave markers.
Hmm.
But I always include geophysics as part of my presentations on cemetery preservation planning and documentation.
Okay, great. Thank you. An additional
Sure.
question I put in the chat. What are your thoughts on partly buried grave markers and how to handle them?
Burying them?
No, partly buried grave markers. Some grave markers aren't totally buried and only their tops are sticking up. What are your thoughts on how to preserve them and be able to tell their story? going forward?
Well, I think so. Um, First of all, if they're when you say so, I'm thinking of partially buried as what we call ground supported tablets that were originally just when they were set, they were just say a tablet that was partially buried below ground. Um, then there are grave
Yes.
markers, and again, we didn't have it's not part of the presentation tonight, but one of the other things, presentation I've done recently is all the various types of surveys that you can do beyond GPR because we feel like GPR is kind of a buzzword. So at Gear, they're doing a probing survey, a very systematic, well
Oh,
planned, well orchestrated probing survey around at the heads and the feet of the depressions where you can't see grave markers. And recently they sent me photographs of grave markers that they're finding.
yeah.
And we're looking at working with them on how to address that. I don't think that answered, I don't know that answered your question, but
Yeah.
what we typically do on projects is work with the client to
Mhm.
figure out, first of all, what's going on, what they would like to see happen, and then do those meet professional standards? And, if a grave marker that was originally meant to be mounted directly in the ground and ground supported, we put them back exactly how they originally
Okay.
intended to be.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And I'll
Sure, sure.
email you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
please do. Please do.
All right. I'm in New Jersey, by the way.
Oh,
And
good.
yeah, and I'm
I'll
in
be
Camden. I can get right across the bridge to Philly. So,
okay. I'll be in New Jersey soon. So
oh, terrific. See you soon.
yes.
Bye.
Um, so we have two other questions that were in the chat. One is, what advice for researching a potter's field with very little kept in county archives? So what advice
Good. What
do you have?
I do not have a great answer. I am trying to find out. So is this Potter's Field attached to another cemetery, or is it a Potter's Field that's so if you remember in the image that I showed from the town that I live in with the survey of the town, and then there's that block that said Potter's Field. That's separate from any other family church or municipal cemetery. So what I'm doing is I'm doing a title search on that property to see who originally owned this property over the years. But is that Potter's Field, is it on the outskirts or is part of a municipal cemetery?
No, it's by itself.
Okay.
It was next to the county almshouse.
Oh,
Um, it it we believe it's the oldest in New Jersey, though it doesn't get credit for it. That's why we're
oh,
working on preservation. And we were looking for veterans. I believe that there's a lot of World War One in there. Um, we have a couple, but very hard to find um, documented. We have everything, the deed, all of that, but we don't have who is actually buried there. I have spattering of a list, a list from a very small list from the 1800s, a small list from 1942. It ranges, but no clear records. And it's been very difficult to source.
yeah. I would just continue. It's tough, municipal records, city, county, state. It's tough. I don't really have the best. I don't have the answer. Just continue on your journey. Newspapers, is there any reference, there?
Yeah,
Um,
thank
yeah,
you.
it's tough. Yeah, it's tough.
So I have Bob Craig who has his hand up. So Bob,
Um, yeah, thank you. Thank you for your presentation, Jason. Very,
Sure, sure.
very interesting. Couple things. One, just to address the last point, I think the using a combination of funeral directors' records and newspapers is probably your best combination for Potter's Field.
Yeah.
We back in the 90s, I guess it was, we were uh, working on the National Register nomination for the Gethsemane Cemetery up in Little Ferry in Bergen County, New Jersey. And it was quite interesting because that was one of the first times I had ever heard of a um, ground penetrating radar study of a cemetery, which revealed the likelihood of 550 burials in a 1 acre cemetery, quite a lot.
Yeah.
And between the combination of funeral directors and newspapers, they were able to document about 350 of the 550 graves. They were able to put names to and dates to the people who were buried there. It may have been an advantage that it was an African American cemetery because there were certain long-standing funeral directors in that community that had records going back over 100 years. Um, so that was a big part of it. But my question for Jason is, have you found any civil engineers mapping cemeteries? Surveys when a cemetery is created. Have you found any civil engineers maps? Because sometimes they'll land surveyors or civil engineers will do the original mapping of a cemetery.
Yeah, we have, again, I didn't include them tonight, but we have found a number of those that are actually very detailed and that have proven invaluable over the course of time. It's just another resource that what we found is that not every cemetery has the same, some that you work with or work on, there's just a plethora of resources that are there. And then others that we work with who will tell us we can't find anything. Like it's just not there. Either it was not done, it was not completed, or the resources are still not there.
Be careful when you before you conclude that it's not there. It's one thing
Well,
to say you can't find it.
well,
Just be very, 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 very reluctant to say it's not there, because
well,
what's actually out there can very often just shock you with the breadth and intensity of it.
yeah, I have
You
found
know where to
over,
look for it.
yes, I have. There are
That's my
historic
specialty.
resources. There are
Knowing where
historic
to look.
resources over the years that I thought we would never find historic photographs of them. And one in particular, and the region that I live in, it was found at the bottom of a box that was given to a local museum that was underneath quilts, coverlets, all kinds of things. But it eventually, like you said, it eventually showed up. It's just keep, the fortitude, the persistence, and it may turn up.
All right, I think we have two more questions in the chat, and I do want to respect everyone's time this evening. So the next one by Sherry is, what is a reflector? Do you have a photo of one, and is it simply a mirror?
You can use a mirror. A reflector, the easiest way to explain it is if you've seen models being photographed on a beach, it's just a big circle that they use to reflect light off of onto them. And send me an email. I can send you a photograph of my reflector so you can see, and you can get them in different sizes, but you can actually use a mirror as well, or a flashlight.
Excellent. The next one I have here, so Vanderhoff writes, dead end research question. Town and developer cut down the side of the cemetery to make room for an industrial park, and in the process, they disposed of 58 graves of Civil War veterans in a section purchased by the GAR, the Grand Army of the Republic. So trying to figure out who was buried there. So any advice, suggestions?
Jason, let me, because we've been working. I don't know if can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we've been working this cemetery has a lot of issues, and your team was in 2012 because PSE&G built their power towers in what we believe is the enslaved African section of the cemetery. The graves are interspersed among the power towers, and PSE&G was your client. But on the other corner, the town wanted to put in an industrial park. In 1958, they believe, it was a suburban town. They believed that would create property tax. They would help the rest of the town members by having industry. So they really wanted this. They came in, they cut 44 feet off the side of a hill for 300 feet. They disposed of a couple of hundred bodies. There's no record, there's no legal thing. They just wanted it to disappear. But in searching the records, I found out that the GAR had purchased 3 of the 20 burial site plots in 1871, and they had purportedly been full. But I've been trying to find out where records could be for the GAR, if they had. I mean, there seems to be a dead end. They've disappeared off the face of the earth. But it's kind of interesting because I'm wondering who is there. It's probably the only section of the cemetery that isn't local, because I think a number of GAR chapters used it for people out of veterans' homes at the end of their lives who had no family. So, where do we look? What can we do? It's really kind of a missing piece of our puzzle.
I would say, will you send me an email? Will you send, that's a lot to,
Okay, I can send you. We have a book pre-publication on the
okay,
entire.
sure.
So I'll send that to you tomorrow, because there's a lot of your firm's work
Okay.
that we have questions about.
Oh,
So
okay, sure.
great.
What
Okay.
what year was that?
Well, the cemetery started in 1715. The bodies were thrown out in 1958. I'll give you all kinds of dates, but the town took over the cemetery by adverse seizure, whatever you call it, because the PSEG put the power towers through. They've paid over $400,000 for over the cemetery. The town has been taking that money into general coffers and not putting anything into the cemetery. It's a big issue. So
What's the name of the cemetery?
cemetery, it's 3 cemeteries. It's called Cedar Grove Cemetery. It's actually a combination of the Dreamus burying ground from the Dreamus farm, which is 1 acre, and 2 side half acres, which was referred to as the Canfield cemeteries, and that was a later Dreamus generation who went into the cemetery business.
Okay.
So my name is not Rosalind, it's Dory, Dory. So I'll send you the material, and then maybe we can send it off.
Sure, that'd be great.
Because we have 70 headstones to repair too.
Okay,
So,
that's great.
Great.
Thank you for bringing that up.
okay, thank you.
Thanks, man.
So we have one final question for this evening from Karen. And actually, this is sort of, we've talked about this as a topic in our last session. So she writes, we're a volunteer team that is caring for an abandoned cemetery. It's the Greens Chapel Cemetery in Warren County, New Jersey, that is deemed privately owned per the city and the state from the property deed. Do you have any resources that can help with the legal aspects of cemeteries
Yes.
that could help us?
So email me. I am not an attorney. I am not an attorney. I don't deal with legal aspects, but I do know someone so we have been working with someone who is helping cemetery stewards, or is working to help them find the right direction. So please email me and I will put you in contact with that person.
Okay. Thank you so much. I will definitely email you.
Please do. Please do.
Thank you.
All right. Well, that will be the conclusion of our program this evening. I want to thank everyone and Jason specifically for your time. There's a lot of information here, but please stay tuned if you've joined us for the first, if you joined us tonight. We do have our 3rd installment which we're taking a month off, but we will be back on May 13th for the third installment of our cemetery stewardship program, where we will go over conservation and preservation. So that's the next theme of our talk. And then you can join us at the end of June for our first in-person, in the field with Jason workshop. It'll be the last weekend in June, the 28th and 29th. And we hope that you can continue to support this program. We have more cemetery preservation ideas for the summer and the fall. And outside of cemeteries, we're going to kick off our tour season in person, so April 26th. If you have not already, please register for our first tour in Plainfield, New Jersey. Then in June, we will be in Flemington at the historic Hunterdon Courthouse and downtown Flemington. Again, thank you all. I am going to send Jason's contact along with this recording to everyone following our presentation. And of course, please reach out to Jason or Preservation New Jersey with any questions that you have, and we're here to support and assist. So thank you.
Support Preservation New Jersey.
Yes, and support Preservation New Jersey. Become a member. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you
everyone.
so much.